our next speaker. We have Jennifer Sagalyn joining us from Perkins School of the Blind. Let's see if Jennifer's in the house. There we go. How you doing, Jennifer?
I'm great. How are you?
Good, good. It's been such a diverse, interesting day today.
I'm excited to put a final stamp on this part of it.
You're kind of the exclamation point at the end of the day.
Excellent.
On a topic that I know I've heard a lot about in marketing and websites. With Gary and the team over at Global eLearning, I know that accessibility is pretty high on the radar. And certainly for e-learning, it's something, I loved the fact that Tiffany, just as she went through each slide, she was describing the slide and reading through them, which certainly helps with accessibility for those people that need that assistance. So
I was silently cheering.
I'll bet you were. I'll bet you were. So that was a nice segue into what I know you have to offer us today. And so what we're going to do, Jennifer, is I believe we're going to share your presentation. Is that correct?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so we will share the screen and we'll invite you to begin the presentation for today.
Super. So, all right, great. Let me just get myself all set up here. So thank you so much to Global eLearning for this opportunity. My name is Jennifer Sagalyn, and I am the Director of Strategic Partnerships for Perkins Access. Perkins Access is the digital accessibility consulting division of Perkins School for the Blind. I'm really very excited to be here. Most of the presentations that I give are about how an organization can make their products and services accessible, which I absolutely love to do. But I'm also really excited to share a little bit about my story and why I'm so passionate about accessibility, and particularly media and web accessibility. I hope that you'll find, some connections to your work as well. I know that some of the panelists have done polls. Tiffany had several, and it's super engaging. And I don't have a poll, but I do want to suggest, it's the end of the day. If you have a cup of coffee, I'm going to suggest that every time you hear the words inclusion, everyone, or built in, you should have some coffee. And that way I know you're awake and paying attention, and it'll be fun. So let's get started. I've been really fortunate to work for two of the most well-known educational institutions in the country. I'm part of Perkins Access at Perkins School for the Blind. And Perkins is the oldest school for the blind in the US. And I also worked at WGBH Educational Foundation, Boston's public broadcasting station. Perkins was established in 1829. It's well known for Laura Bridgman and Helen Keller. And you can really feel their legacy when you're on the Perkins campus. I actually take clients on tours, and when we get to the Perkins Museum, I literally get chills every time we get to the tactile globe that Helen Keller used. And it is just amazing. And the visitors actually get to touch the globe because we really want people to physically get a sense of the history. So it's really incredible. And if anyone's in the Boston area, please give me a ring. And when the pandemic is past, we'll take a tour. So on this slide, we have the text. It all began with Julia, and the headline that this is a first caption TV show, which is giving a little bit away. And there is a visual of the television screen. And there's Julia, who happens to be 6'2", and she's standing in her kitchen. And in the screenshot, there's on the TV, there's letters that are across the lower part of the screen. So I just want to be clear, I did not start my career in 1974 or 73. It was a little bit after that. So I'm going to take a little time to talk about the origins of closed captioning for video, but there's sort of a method to my madness, and hopefully it'll become clear as we go along. So in 1971, the Caption Center at WGBH invented broadcast captioning. In 1972, the French chef with Julia Child was the was a GBH production, and it was the very first open captioned television program. The captions were created at the Caption Center at WGBH. And this was, which is just amazing, the first television program to include captions for deaf and hard of hearing audiences. Soon after that, the Caption Center began providing open captions for the ABC World News Tonight show. And that became the only national newscast for people with hearing impairments in the 70s, which is just kind of amazing to imagine how limited the programming was. So the open caption solution that was used at that time is where open captions are permanently displayed on the TV screen. So while that was a major technical advancement, it was really distracting to the general audience. So in order to get the TV industry to say, yes, we are going to support closed captions or any kind of captions, there had to be a way to hide the captions. So the solution, closed captions as we know them today, is where viewers can turn them on and off. And that came along in about 1980. Some smart people figured out how to insert the captions into the television signal. And that was a way to hide the data. And at that point, unfortunately, the televisions of the time did not contain any way to read the caption data in that television signal. So an add-on device was created called a caption decoder box, and that had to be actually purchased by a consumer and connected to the television in order to turn the captions on and off. It turns out that in 1981, Sesame Street was the first closed captioned children's television program. So certainly a program that I used to watch a lot. Thankfully, in 1990, the Television Decoder Circuitry Act came along to require closed caption decoders to be built into the TV sets. And they had to be 13 inches or larger. And I was trying to imagine like a 13-inch TV. I think that's the kind of size of our computer screens now. So open captions, like those that appeared on Julia Child's French Chef, those were a bolt-on solution. They couldn't be turned on or off. And those decoder boxes, they were quite literally a bolt-on solution. You had to connect them to the television. So I think it's worth pointing out that the retrofits in general are just very expensive. So a decoder box at the time cost $500. And to put that in perspective, that's about $1,600 today. So thankfully, with that Decoder Circuitry Act that was passed, TVs sort of built in the closed caption capability into the television sets. So we're kind of getting to my story part. A few years later, in 1994, I started my career in the Caption Center at GBH. I picked the position over a very glamorous, well, at least I thought so, job at a Boston ad agency. But actually, my decision was very personal. My mom was slowly losing her vision. And, I just really wanted to put my energy and passion into something that would make a difference for people with disabilities. So I feel so lucky that I started kind of in the field, somewhat just by accident, but it was a big position for me and a big day. I started in marketing, and at the time, GBH was being hired by the major network television, ABC and NBC, CBS, to provide closed captions. And the big advertisers were putting money in to pay for the captions, and they would in exchange get a credit in the closed captioning. And it's interesting when I go to my mechanic and the reruns of some of the 90s TV shows are on and they have the captions on, I still see the credits that are running in the captions. So next time you see reruns and watching captions, you can see at the very end, it'll give a credit. So I always get excited when I see that. So my first job was to establish these relationships with the advertisers to help cover these costs for programs, news programs, sports programs, and shows like Friends. So really the thread that's running throughout, I think, my story is about creating inclusive, built-in accessibility into products and services so that they work for everybody. I was really lucky to encounter so many pioneers along the way that were creating groundbreaking solutions, and these solutions advanced accessibility for millions of people with disabilities. And they also really improved the overall usability of products and services for everybody. And I think it's worth emphasizing, and I'm definitely going to, I'm sure, repeat this again. Accessibility just improves usability for everybody. So in 1996, we're making our way, the Telecommunications Act was passed, and more television had to provide closed captioning. And this led the major networks and the production companies to start putting those those small caption budgets into their very large TV production budgets. So I was not needed to be doing the advertising marketing job that I was doing, but I was not quite out of a job yet. I want to just mention briefly, I have talked a lot about closed captioning, but at the same time period, GBH also invented something called audio description. And that's a way for someone who has a visual impairment to receive supplemental audio information about what's taking place on the screen. So if you think of a musical montage, very common in sort of an 80s rom-com, or a scene where you have somebody who's standing behind a door and they have a knife and they're, waiting for someone to come around the corner, they're not going to be saying that in the audio, there's someone behind the door with a knife. There's, visual information, and the only way to know that if you have a visual impairment is for the audio description to give you that information. So going back to captions, we see that captions, they started as a bolt-on retrofit, but then they became a built-in capability of all TV sets. And now more and more programming includes captions. Something that I think is just really important to think about is that when there was a time, we used to go to noisy bars, and it has been a while, certainly for me, and you couldn't hear the TV. I also really enjoy watching British television shows. I most of the time have no idea what they're saying, and it's the closed captions that really make it possible for us to have access to all of that information. Today, closed captioning is just a routine part of the television production process. And because of this, everyone benefits from those captions. So yes, this is what I've been leading up to. Building accessibility in to a product or service supports the varying needs of everyone, of people with disabilities and everyone else who's using maybe media in this case. So if you use Facebook or YouTube, that captions are helpful. There's a 2016 survey that found that 85% of all video views on Facebook were with the sound off. And a 2019 survey found that a vast majority of people watched mobile videos on mute. So without captions, if you're putting advertising on either of those channels, then you're missing out on a huge audience as well. Television and online video captions, learning content with captions that just make it possible for everyone to access information, and it's really essential for people with disabilities. So closed captioning took a really long time to go from that retrofit solution to a built-in feature. I'm hoping everyone is really caffeinated by this point. I've used that word quite a bit. If we were designing a TV today, we'd think about the entire audience. We'd think about how we needed closed captioning and audio description. And we definitely want to have our voice assistant so that we can say, hey, please turn on the TV. Those are all of the features that we would just build right into the TV, and they would have benefits for such a broad audience. What this is called is inclusive design. Inclusive design is about considering as many people as possible when you are designing a product or service. And inclusive design is about considering the full range of diversity, so ability, language, culture, gender, age, and all other forms of human difference. In today's world, we have so much research, expertise, technical capabilities, and an entire industry that's actually focused on user experience. So for me at this point, there really isn't an excuse for not using the principles of inclusive design, unless you want to spend more time and money later to make it right. So on the screen, we have an image of a curb cut. I actually had to explain to my 15-year-old, as I was describing curb cuts to him, he said, "What's a curb cut?" And so we were driving, I said, "That's a curb cut." He's like, "I had no idea that's what it was called." So that is a curb cut, and I bet that we're mostly all familiar with them. And on this image, there's actually a tactile surface indicator, and that is for someone who's visually impaired or a blind pedestrian. So the date is July 26, 1990, and that is the date that the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed. So interestingly, some of the earliest curb cuts were actually in the 1940s in Kalamazoo, Michigan. It was a pilot project for assisting in the employment of veterans. So it actually wasn't, though, until 1990 that the curb cuts in the US were mandated. So it's been a long road. That was 50 years it took to get this amazing solution that actually has, I think, more benefits, than even Captions in many ways. My career started shortly after the ADA was signed, and I think that since that time, I've probably used curb cuts thousands and thousands of times, and I imagine you have too. If you have ever pushed a stroller or a shopping cart, or you've been pulling your luggage behind you, curb cuts are just a tremendous opportunity for someone who needs that, and it just solves problems for so many people. It meets the needs of a wide audience, and although they were designed for people with disabilities. So while the ADA does not specifically mention websites, it was 1990 after all, the ADA was passed. It passed, so Title II of the ADA has since been interpreted by the US courts to apply to websites. And some famous lawsuits have been Domino's, Target, and even Beyonce. So jumping back into my story, in 1997, I was asked to create a program to develop revenue for a new department at WGBH. And it was called the National Center for Accessible Media. And it was a group dedicated to creating accessibility solutions for emerging technologies, including the web. So I led the formation of a successful digital accessibility consulting program, and we advised major technology companies on how to break down accessibility barriers to all information, whether it was on a computer, a tablet, a phone, cable set-top boxes, wherever people with disabilities encountered obstacles and challenges. I think about those days and how web accessibility was so new, and I was reaching out to companies to say, I know that this website that you just launched you're very excited about it, but did you know that it isn't accessible to someone who uses a screen reader who's blind or visually impaired? And people really were very receptive. They wanted to know they got it. So we made so much progress in those years working with companies on accessibility. So I was just kicking off this new program, and some amazing web accessibility activities really started to come together. So the Web Accessibility Initiative at the World Wide Web Consortium was officially launched. That led to the first version of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And most people call it WCAG, just in case you've heard the phrase. A new bill was proposed that led to the update of the Section 508 Rehabilitation Act, and its mandates made the web more enforceable. And so it was, kind of definitely a supporting actor in driving web accessibility. And HTML4 was released. It was the first version of the specification to include web accessibility in the spec. So the train was definitely pulling out of the station. There's knowledge, there's tools, there's best practices. All of these things are available so that web designers and developers can create accessible web content. Over the next 10 years, accessibility champions worked tirelessly to make sure that all new web technologies, software platforms, and the transition to digital for television, motion pictures, communication devices included accessibility. I'm going to geek out for a minute, but honestly, these are like the little moments about why I'm still working in accessibility. It's just so exciting to be part of a project that makes a new technology accessible, and recently ensures a presidential campaign is available to everyone. Consulting projects that I've worked on have really given me a front row seat, quite literally, to some amazing breakthroughs. So I'll just run through a couple. So on the screen is an image of Zoot Suit riots. And it was a web companion to a GBH American Experience program. And the Zoot Suit culture was this sort of interactive web activity that they created, and it was in Flash. So in 2002, I was in my office about 9 o'clock at night, and I was waiting for an email from a Flash engineer at Macromedia, which is now Adobe. And I was waiting for him to send me a software patch. So Flash, which is ending December 31st of 2020, was enabled really cool video at the time and animation and all kinds of interactivity. But it also really caused a big controversy with the visually impaired in the community. It did not speak to assistive technology, screen readers. So a screen reader is a tool that's in widespread use by people with visual impairment to access software applications and web content. So the engineer needed me to take his update and download it. So I installed it and I fired up my screen reader. And for the first time, I was able to hear the content through my screen reader of that Flash content that was on my screen. So I have to say that it was an amazing moment to feel like this huge obstacle for people with visual impairment. There was a solution, and it was coming together at that very moment. So around the same time, I sat in my apartment in front of my computer. I opened up a live webcast of the Neil Young Bridge School concert, and I was using Windows Media Player. And what I was able to see for the very first time was live captions appearing on the live streaming video. So I was able to turn the captions on the Windows Media Player. So it was built in, and it was displaying the captions that were being created by a highly trained transcriber, so a steno captioner. And the captions that they were creating were going through a special technology, and that was being translated into a format that was compatible with the Windows Media Player. So for the first time, I helped get some funding from a partnership that made it possible for deaf and hard of hearing audiences around the world to have access to a live streaming broadcast. Certainly we take it maybe for granted today. We can make a call for a conference or for a meeting and say, I need you to, send captions over for this live presentation. It is something that I got to see for the first time, and it was really, really cool. So the last one I'll talk about is in spring of 2005. Very exciting consulting partnership I managed was for a new application that was launched by Apple Computer. It was called Voiceover, and it was built directly into the Apple operating system. It was a really big deal. A lot of work went into to building Voiceover, and it's continued to evolve over the years. The Voiceover immediately made it possible for someone with visual impairment to use the applications that were part of the operating system. It really worked seamlessly. So it was built in and very inclusive. Within a few years, Apple extended the capability into iTunes and then into the iPod. And another major breakthrough was when Voiceover was put into the iPhone, which was truly a game changer. So we've talked about how inclusive design has huge benefits. You've seen how captions and curb cuts have evolved and can be used for audiences really larger than intended. And now I want to circle back to talk a little bit about the audience and sort of the group of people with disabilities, that we're talking about around the country. So, I'll say that on this screen, the text is population of persons with disabilities, and it's an image of the United States with some of the states highlighted. So to be honest, lots of companies come to me when they're facing a legal threat, and risk is often a driver for accessibility. But there are a lot of other important factors to consider when thinking about the return on investment for accessibility. So the size of the market is one of those things, and the disability population is probably a lot larger than you might realize. So if we're looking at the image, about 1 in 4 Americans is identified as having a disability, and we can divide those into 4 categories. So we have people with visual impairment, someone who's blind or visually impaired or situationally disabled because of cataracts or glaucoma. And that's about 20 million people in the US, and that's roughly the size of New York State. People with auditory disabilities, primarily someone who's deaf or hard of hearing, or someone who's deafblind. That's about 16 million, and that equals the population of all of the New England states combined. And in the world of cognitive disabilities, we're referring to people with learning disabilities, that someone might have dyslexia. That's about 34 million people, and it's about the size of Texas. And there are about 40 million people in the United States with some form of motor disabilities, and that's about equivalent to the population of California. So one more powerful number to help build the case for accessibility: people with disabilities and their families control over $8 trillion in disposable income globally. So being an inclusive company matters. Companies buy from brands that make them feel included and considered. 70% of millennials and 52% of adults actively consider companies when they're making an online purchase that are inclusive. So we know it's efficient and cheaper to build in accessibility from the beginning, and that retrofitting accessibility is a lot more expensive than building it in. 15 times more for software development, where if you have a bug that you fix at the end of the development cycle versus when you're building, that's a huge increase, and the same principle applies to digital accessibility. So from curb cuts to closed captions in the web, and if we were all in the same room, but I would ask everyone to join me in saying accessibility benefits everyone. So next slide, please. And I know I have just a minute to wrap up. So there's a slide, an aerial view of Perkins School for the Blind with the Boston skyline in the background. And today I continue to work on accessibility partnerships with universities and healthcare providers and technology vendors. We are proponents of principles of inclusive design, including users in the creation of new technologies, testing with users, and making information accessible to the widest range of people. We are so very supportive of inclusive design that we're actually launching an inclusive design guide in December. So we'll be putting information out about that. And we really know that building accessibility in is what helps organizations to build products that work and support everyone. And the needs of accessible learning content today, it's great. It's more important than ever because of the widespread adoption of remote learning. This is a space that's really transforming before our eyes, and it's critical that we think about all of the users and our whole audience when we're designing and developing those solutions. I'm just learning about a new thing called LXD, Learning Experience Design, that's growing out of web user experience and learning theory. So I'm excited to dig into that. I am as proud and excited to be working on the front lines of accessibility today as I was 20 years ago. And it's great to be part of new solutions and new ideas. And it's great being here with all of you on the cutting edge. As all of your organizations move into the new era of e-learning, I hope some of these insights around accessibility we'll encourage you to never lose sight of the fact that everyone benefits from accessibility that's built in.
Fantastic job, Jennifer. That was quite a journey you took us on.
I think I fit in almost every last word.
Yes, I knew what curb cuts were, but I didn't know that's what they were called. So I took that away.
Excellent.
And, I'm like you. I watch a lot of, Netflix or Prime or any of these TV shows. And my husband and I guess it's because we're getting older, we turn on closed captions because we don't understand the accents, or, even in Game of Thrones, we couldn't understand what they were saying because of the accents. So we turn on closed captions. So I totally get this.
Excellent. Excellent.
So good stuff. Good stuff. And you're obviously a valuable resource. So we certainly appreciate you joining us today for that and sharing your story as well. We're going to get Gary in here. Thank you, Jennifer. You have wrapped up the day beautifully, brought it to a great close, and we're going to get Gary in here to close us out. There he is. Gary, how did you enjoy Jennifer's topic? Oh, Gary's on mute.
Gary's on mute.
There we go.
Jennifer, thank you very much. I'll be honest. The fact that you have this passion and you're saying that after these years, it has not grown dim for you, that you have the same amount of passion now, says a lot about what you do. And for all of us, if we had a career in which we could believe and understand and say, I have purpose and I want to see this purpose fulfilled. You're an amazing person, and thank you very much for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
She needs to go to the after party. Is that correct,
Yes.
Suzanne?
Yep.
Right. Off you go.
Party to go to.